Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us and helping us make this town hall a productive conversation this evening. My name is Mike Gurney. I'm with EGLE's Environmental Support Division, and this is the Oscoda Area and former Wurtsmith Air Force Base PFAS update meeting. Shelley, if you want to hit the next slide, please. I've got just a couple incoming webinar housekeeping slides for you. For those of you who are familiar with these meetings, they'll look very similar to what you've seen in the past. All lines are going to be muted during the webinar here today. We are recording the webinar. One of the things I do want to mention is we've already gotten the question. The slides from today's presentation will be available. They'll be posted on the MPART website. So this will be available after the fact if you need to go back and reference it or want to look at anything in depth. So Shelley, if you want to hit the next slide, please. After the presentations, we're going to have a question and answer portion of the presentation. To do that, feel free throughout the evening to submit your questions in the Q&A box of your Zoom toolbar. We'll look at those, and like I said, during the Q&A portion, we'll be able to run through those and answer those questions. At that time, if you would like to ask the question out loud, you can use the raise hand function in Zoom, or if you're on your phone, I don't see anybody just calling in, but we'll make sure to mention this again. You can hit the pound or hash sign and then the number 2. So again, that's pound or hash and then the number 2. So with that, Shelley, if you want to hit the slide one more time, and I will hand it over to Abigail Hendershot.
Thanks, Mike. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Happy to be here with you tonight. I'm going to be your moderator for the night. So as everyone probably knows, Abigail Hendershot, Executive Director for the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team. Shelley, let's go to the next slide. We have a full agenda. We're going to have updates from EGLE staff, updates from our MDHHS staff. We have plenty of times for questions and answers. And, we will have we've got a couple of specific presentations that you guys have asked for. On board tonight will be presentations from Beth Place, from Lynn Dawson for the area stuff. Puneet from DHHS is going to talk, as well as a new face to you, Kevin Cox, who is our new toxicological manager for water resources, is going to talk about surface water quality values. And then we will go into questions and answers. So let's go ahead and get started and kick this night off. And as Mike said, feel free to chat and send questions to us at any time, so we don't forget to ask your question, but we'll have time afterwards. So next slide. All right, I'm going to kick it off over to Beth, and she can start with updates.
Hi, I'm Beth Place. And I am the project manager for the former Wurtsmith Air Force Base for EGLE. Next slide, please. Wurtsmith has over a 70-year active history. It was established in 1923 and then it closed in 1993 under the base realignment and closure decision of 1991. Most of the acreage has been transferred for reuse. And the cleanup is led by Air Force under CERCLA. Next slide, please. Here you can see the what we call the legacy or historical environmental response. These are installation restoration sites. Air Force has completed several cleanups already prior to PFAS. And a lot of those were from fuels and solvents left over from operations of Air Force. A lot of TCE and PCE to groundwater and soil or from waste handling practices. And one thing to note on this figure are those yellow or orange triangles. And those are locations of treatment systems that are located on this. Next slide, please. Once PFAS was found at Wurtsmith, the EGLE PFAS response has included groundwater sampling, surface water sampling, sampling of biota, residential well sampling, and conducting research in the area to try to understand PFAS and the environment better. Next slide, please. The Air Force PFAS response, again, that's under CERCLA. And Air Force has conducted the preliminary assessment, the site inspection phase, and they're currently in the remedial investigation phase. Right now, Air Force just completed or is about to complete their second year of field work for the remedial investigation, or sometimes we call it the RI. And we anticipate there will be a third field season starting in spring of 2023. Air Force has also completed removal actions and other actions at Wurtsmith to address PFAS, including the installation of the FTO2 treatment system near Clark's Marsh, combining the aero and benzene groundwater treatment systems for discharge through the central treatment system, which then treats that discharge for PFAS. And those two systems were originally put in to address VOCs. Air Force has also completed a non-time critical removal action, and that was done to address, again, PFAS contaminated groundwater, the discharge of that through the Mission Street pump and treat system. And Mission Street was also, again, originally installed to treat VOCs. In 2021, Air Force completed rather a large soil removal at FTO2 to remove PFAS contaminated soil and dispose of that off site. And Air Force has also been working on 2 interim remedial actions at Wurtsmith to expand the FTO2 treatment system. That expansion was turned on in August of 2022. And then an expansion of treating groundwater at the central treatment system. And that should be turned on, according to Air Force, in October of this year. So very soon. Next slide, please. And here you can see the description of those 2 interim remedial actions that I just described. And so we have the FTO2 system at Clark's Marsh. And then on the left-hand side, you can see the central treatment system design. Next slide, please. This is the Air Force projected timeline, and this was a timeline presented at the Air Force Restoration Advisory Board meeting on August 17th. And so here you can see basically the timeline of the IRAs, interim remedial actions for FTO2 and for the central treatment system, or it's also referred to as Van Etten Lake at Penn Ratliff Memorial Park. And again, that one should start up in October. And you can also see the RI fieldwork timeline. Next slide, please. I just wanted to convey this information. Air Force has information out there on the web. So I know most folks that attend these meetings know we have the michigan.gov/Wurtsmith website through MPART. But Air Force also has a few websites. And so they have their Air Force Administrative Record, which you can see the address here for the AFCAC cloud address. And that has several of the documents that have been completed by Air Force throughout the years. It's very informative. You can download these documents and take a look at them. And then I also wanted to point out that Air Force has this Restoration Advisory Board website, and that's the address on the right. And so I'm not sure if you can see it from this figure, but you can see that they have the presentation from the August meeting posted, as well as several figures. And so those figures, I believe the most recent figures posted show the progress of the PFAS remedial investigation through May of 2022. And so those are some things that folks can look at to just see progress. Next slide, please. And Lynn will now talk about the Oscoda area site. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yep,
Lynn
sound good.
With RRD in Bay City. And I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about some of the other Oscoda and Osaba Township sites that we have. Next slide, please. So Oscoda, Osaba Township, we have 5 investigation areas that we're looking at, and I'm going to give you just a brief update on the sampling that we did in July of this year. Next slide, please. This figure shows the Colbath Road area located down the northwest end of Van Etten Lake. There were 2 wells sampled in this area in July. One was above EGLE's drinking water cleanup criteria. PFAS in this area is believed to be associated with a historic fire that was put out with firefighting foam containing PFAS. The Oscoda Township is working to extend municipal water service to this area. Next slide, please. This figure shows the results for one well that was sampled at the east end of Cedar Lake. The July result was below drinking water cleanup criteria for PFAS. Next slide. In this figure, we see the results for 8 wells sampled around the southeastern portion of Van Etten Lake. 2 of the wells had detections of PFAS above drinking water cleanup criteria. The source of PFAS in this area is currently unknown, and the expansion of municipal water service is ongoing. Next slide. This figure shows the results for 3 wells sampled near Oscoda area schools, all of which were above drinking water criteria in July of this year. The contamination in this area is believed to be associated with a historic fire at the school storage building that was fought with a triple F containing PFAS. The school complex is currently on municipal water, and Oscoda Township is working to extend municipal service to the residential neighborhood across the street to the north of the school. Next slide. In this slide, we see the results for monitoring well sampled in Osaba Township near Mill Street and Sunset Road. PFAS results for the well was below drinking water cleanup criteria in July of 2022, as well as in January of 2022, July and October of 2021. Next slide. This is the Smith Street area in Osaba Township near the mouth of the Osaba River. In July of 2022, we sampled 8 monitoring wells and 1 surface water. 7 of the monitoring wells were above drinking water cleanup criteria. The source of contamination in the area is unknown. Municipal water is currently available in this area, but there are still a few homes with private wells that have been identified. We have sampled the private wells and they were below criteria. An additional investigation is tentatively planned for this area next year to help determine the source and better define the extent of contamination to the south and west. Next slide. In June of 2022, EGLE investigated a former general store fire on F41 that was extinguished with AFFF foam in 1992. This slide depicts the soil sampling conducted in the area of the fire, as well as adjoining properties in which the AFFF foam is thought to have traveled. This investigation expanded on work that was conducted in 2018 at the site. Next slide, please. Monitoring wells were installed during the June investigation, and this slide depicts the first round of samples collected. Currently, quarterly sampling is planned for at least 1 year with these wells. Next slide. In addition to the soil and monitoring well samples that we collected, we also collected surface waters from samples from 5 locations in Hill Creek, south of the site, and from a small pond north of the former store on the same property that the store was located. As you can see, 3 of the samples downstream have some detection limits that were above criteria. Next slide, please. This slide depicts sediment samples taken from Hill Creek during the June investigation. All of the figures I went through today, along with other investigation reports and data for the Oscoda area sites, will be available on the MPART webpage in the near future. If you have any questions or concerns or need help finding any information, please reach out. Tonight, our next speaker will be Puneet from MDHHS.
Thank you, Lynn. Good evening, everyone. My name is Puneet Vij, and I am a toxicologist with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. Next slide, please. Tonight, I'll be talking about the health effects associated with PFAS and sharing with you the resampling efforts surrounding the Wurtsmith Air Force Base. Next slide. So most of what we know about the toxicity of PFAS comes from studies of two specific compounds, PFOA and PFOS. Adverse health effects have been established in epidemiological and laboratory animal model studies for these PFAS chemicals. This slide provides some of the adverse health effects in humans associated with higher PFAS exposure from these epi studies, which includes reduced fertility, increasing the chance of high blood pressure or preeclampsia in pregnant women, where preeclampsia is a pregnancy complication characterized by high blood pressure, small decrease in infant birth weight, increasing cholesterol levels, specifically total and low density lipoprotein cholesterol. Next slide, please. Increasing the chance of thyroid disease and liver damage, decrease in the immune response to vaccines, and increasing chance of cancer, especially kidney and testicular cancers. Next slide, please. The MDHHS resampling effort is to understand PFAS fluctuations in drinking water wells, and this, along with the source area characterization or extent of plume contamination, will help support our final public health determination. In this round 3 of resampling effort, we collected samples from 225 homes until now. And out of these, we received results from 70. And out of these 70 results, there are 44 non-detects and 26 detections. Out of these, 23 are below all the comparison values, and 3 detections exceeded the MDHHS comparison values. Regarding Oscoda Area exposure assessment, the investigation team has been talking to the community advisory team regarding eligibility for the project, and we plan on starting recruitment activities this month. Next slide, please. Amounts of PFAS in foam is usually higher than in the surface water, and swallowing foam could be a health risk. PFAS do not easily absorb through the skin, but hand-to-mouth behavior in children is a concern and creates an ingestion problem. So it's best to rinse off foam after contact and bathe or shower after outdoor activities such as swimming. Dogs can potentially swallow foam collected in their fur when grooming themselves, so they should be thoroughly rinsed with fresh water after contact with foam. As a rule of thumb, regardless of the type, we recommend to bathe or shower after the day's activities to avoid any PFAS exposure. Next slide, please. These are some of the additional resources so that you can get more information about PFAS. Okay, I'll give this virtual podium to Kevin Cox now. Thank you.
Thank you, Puneet. So my name is Kevin Cox. I'm a toxicologist manager within the Water Resource Division at EGLE. I'm here to talk about the updated water quality value for perfluoroalkyl acid, PFOA, as well as the new water quality value for perfluorobutane sulfonic acid. Next slide, please. So as you can see on this table here, we had a previous PFOA water quality value of 420 for human non-cancer value for drinking water and 12,000 nanograms per liter for a non-cancer value for non-drinking water. Those have been updated to 66 and 170 nanograms per liter respectively. The aquatic toxicity values, the FCV, AMV, and FAV, have stayed the same. PFBS is a new water quality value, which resulted in a human non-cancer value for drinking water of 8,300 and a non-drinking water value of 670,000 nanograms per liter. And the aquatic, the product value, aquatic maximum value, and the acute values are seen on the slides there at 24 million nanograms per liter, 120 million nanograms per liter, and 240 million nanograms per liter, respectively. Next slide, please. So what are the water quality values? They are promulgated under Michigan Rule 323.1057 within Part 4 of our water quality standards. These are narrative procedures for calculating these water quality values intended to protect human health, wildlife, as well as aquatic life. These water quality values are applicable to the Great Lakes and connecting waters and all other surface waters of the state. There are some exceptions for site-specific values. Predominantly, those are related to increased copper in the water in the Upper Peninsula. Next slide, please. So where are these Rule 57 values used? Well, they're really used to help identify and support what are the designated uses of receiving waters within the United States. Those are listed, or within Michigan, excuse me. Those designated uses are listed there on the slide. I won't read through all of them, but primarily they're used to enforce Michigan's Part 8 rules, where they're used to help determine limits for discharging pollutants from water treatment plants, industrial and commercial facilities, and other regulated entities. Next slide. So what are Rule 57 values? Again, I have the link to the website where you can read more about the Rule 57 values and see all of the Rule 57 values, but they're divided up into the really three sections: the aquatic life values, the wildlife values, and the human health values. You can see the three values for the aquatic life values. I'll talk a little bit more of those in the next slide. Wildlife values are really calculated for chemicals that are bioaccumulation chemicals of concern. And then with the human health values, which are divided into two categories: the non-cancer values and the cancer values. And both of those have subcategories of drinking water and non-drinking water. And I'll explain a little bit more of those in a future slide as well. Next slide, please. So just to touch briefly on the aquatic toxicity values, I'm not going to spend too much time on these because really for PFAS, the human health values are what really drive our water quality values. But just really briefly, we see the three different types of the aquatic toxicity values listed here. The chronic toxicity values are really designed to look at chronic aquatic toxicity in various trophic level 3 and trophic level 4 species that are relevant to our Great Lakes and surface waters of our state of Michigan. The acute value really looks at short-term effects on those aquatic species. And then the aquatic maximum value is the highest concentration of material in the ambient water column to which an aquatic community can be exposed to briefly without resulting in unacceptable effects. And that's usually set at 1/2 of our acute value. So next slide, please. I want to spend more time on the human health values. So we have two forms of the human health values in our water quality values. The first is a non-cancer value, which is essentially the maximum ambient water concentration at which an adverse non-cancer effect are not likely to occur following lifetime exposure through drinking water, fish consumption, and other water-related recreational activities. While the cancer value is similarly a lifetime exposure through either drinking water, fish, or water-related activities that will represent extra risk of contracting cancer in 1 in 100,000. So when we're talking about drinking water, that term tends to lead a little confusion, and we're not actually talking about drinking water you actually drink. The water quality values are only applicable to the surface waters of the state of Michigan. So please do not go out and drink your surface water. Why we refer to them as drinking water is because that's based on the consumption of that, that source water would be used as source water for eventual drinking water consumption. So we apply the drinking water criteria to the Great Lakes and the connecting channels, but also to surface waters that were within 3,000 feet of a point of water intake. And then we use intake assumption of 2 liters of water per day when we calculate our values. For non-drinking values, that is set at 0.01 liters per day as incidental ingestion during recreational activities. Next slide, please. So here are the actual equations for calculating the human non-cancer values. I want to just touch briefly on these in the slide. So just want to talk a little bit about the numerators here on these. So for the human non-cancer value, we have the acceptable daily exposure, which is in milligrams kilogram per day from a key study. That's multiplied by a body weight, which is 70 kilograms. And then the relative source contribution, which accounts for other sources of the contaminant, is set at 0.8. While for the human cancer value, we have a risk associated dose. Again, that's a risk associated with one excess cancer in 100,000 people in the population. And that's at milligrams kilogram per day. And again, that's multiplied through by a body weight of 70 kilograms. Next slide, please. So just a little bit more about the ADE value, because that is what we're going to be looking at shortly for both PFOA and PFBS. So what we're doing to calculate the ADE is we're going through the available toxicology literature and identifying the key study and critical effects. So we're looking for the most sensitive adverse effect within the overall toxicological literature, which could include both animal studies and human studies. And we're trying to find where that lowest level of adversity is, and then are there any doses below that where we're not seeing adversity? So the no observable adverse effect level. Sometimes there's only a low L for certain studies, and that's where you have a low observable adverse effect level where you have no doses below that because you saw adversity at the lowest dose. But once you have identified either the no L or the low L, you then apply uncertainty factors, which are listed here on the slide. So the uncertainty factors account for interspecies differences, so differences across species. There's intraspecies uncertainty, which is uncertainties between humans because there's variability within the human population. Depending on the study used, there might be a duration uncertainty because, again, we're trying to establish a lifetime exposure limit. And so if you're working off of a less than lifetime or subchronic study, you would have to account for uncertainty there. If you're even using a shorter term study, you might have to look at acute to subchronic uncertainties. Again, if you're working off of a low AL, you have some uncertainty because you haven't identified a dose at that point where there is a no adverse effect. So you have some uncertainties there. And then depending on the quality of your overall database, you might apply additional uncertainty because you're not 100% confident that the database has actually captured what the actual key study and critical effect should be. Next slide, please. So now I want to go back and talk a little bit about the denominator of those two equations we just had looked at previously. So again, the denominator of the equations in calculating our water quality values for human health really reflect the exposures. So we talk about the WC, which is our water consumption. We spoke about that already, where it's 2 liters of water a day in those drinking water area, values, and then 0.01 liters per day for non-drinking water scenarios. But then we have these other values, which are really around fish consumption. So trophic level 3 fish consumption, which is the FCTL3 value, and trophic level 4 fish consumption rates. And those are multiplied by bioaccumulation factors. Now, what is a bioaccumulation factor? That's where it's looking at how much that compound builds up in the fish compared to how much it's in the ambient environment. So really we need compound specific information to calculate those BAF values. You look at the physical chemical properties, which is the compound lipophilic. Does it really biomagnify? Does it increase with the, with the different fish as you move up the food chain? And really there's 4 different methods under our rules where we can calculate these BAF values. And we did update a BAF value for PFOA, and I'll talk a little bit more of that shortly. So next slide, please. All right, so here we have the changes for the PFOA water quality value. So we have the prior water quality value, the 2011 value on the left column there, and you have the revised 2022 water quality value for PFOA on the right. We've already talked about those differences in the values at one of the first slides in this deck. So we see that we had a change in the key study. So we had updated toxicology data that we looked at, and we identified co-key studies. The Onoshenko et al. 2011 study in combination with Koskela et al. 2016, which examined a developmental toxicity studies in mice, was selected now as the key study, which the critical effect was skeletal alterations in bone morphology and bone cell differentiation found in the femurs and tibias of these mice, resulting in a low AL of 0.3 milligrams per kilogram per day. This is compared to liver effects that were reported at a low L of 3 milligrams per kilogram per day from a 2002 study in cynomolgus monkeys that was used in the prior water quality value in 2011. We also had updates in the Toxico kinetic parameters. These are parameters that were used to adjust the dose to what would be a human equivalent dose. So there's differences in how the rate of metabolism and as well as the serum half-life in humans compared to animals. So we had updates in that data that were utilized in the new water quality value, going from where previously we'd use a monkey body burden approach to convert the dosing, while we had a more up-to-date approach using the volume distribution and a serum half-life of 840 days, resulting in a human equivalent low AL of 0.00116 milligrams per kilogram per day. Both the key study and the Toxico kinetic parameters that were selected in the updated water quality value actually mirror the key study and toxicokinetic parameters that were utilized in the Michigan MCL values and the development of those values for the drinking water. Same with the uncertainty factors. Previously, we had an uncertainty factor of 3,000 in 2011. That was reduced to 300. Again, similar for interspecies and intraspecies. A 3x low AL factor was chosen based on the adversity of the skeletal findings, but a database factor was also added into the uncertainty for the water quality value. Again, these uncertainty factor selection mirror the choices of uncertainties that were used in the Michigan MCL development. So overall, you end up with an ADE of 0.000039 milligrams per kilogram per day. Now, we talked briefly about the bioaccumulation factors. Previously, in 2011, we had used a bioaccumulation factor of 4 for both the trophic 3 and trophic 4 level species of fish. That was based on a published study at the time. However, since we've been able to accumulate a lot of data in terms of PFOA and other PFAS compounds in our fish in Michigan through our efforts of our fish contaminant monitoring program, and in conjunction with our surface water monitoring program, we were actually able to go through and calculate using both trophic 3 and trophic level fish, a updated BAF factor using Michigan data, which was great. And that ended up revising our BAF factor to 85 upwards from our previous BAF factor of 4. So that was then plugged into the equation to generate, again, the final health water quality values that are at the top of the table there, 66 nanograms per liter for drinking and 170 nanograms per liter for non-drinking. Next slide, please. And just to summarize again, the key study and critical effect were developmental toxicity studies in mice using bone effects, both the, and this was the same as identified in the Michigan drinking water MCL. We had updated toxicokinetic parameters. This was, and those are the same ones that were actually also used in the Michigan drinking water MCL based on the steady state serum concentration resulting in a more conservative adjustment factor. And also for our bioaccumulation factors, we were able to, again, revise using field data that we've gathered through our Michigan FCMP program for multiple trophic 3 and trophic 4 fish species to really generate a more accurate BAF value than we had done previously. Next slide, please. So on to PFBS. Again, we didn't have a previous value, so everything here is new. So we had, again, our drinking water and non-drinking water values are presented at the top of the column here. The key study that was selected was a developmental study in ICR mice, again, another developmental study in mice that were exposed to PFBS on gestation days 1 through 20. The critical effect selected was a decrease in thyroid hormone, thyroxine T4, in the newborn mice, and that resulted in a human equivalent dose, benchmark dose, half standard deviation of 0.093 milligrams per kilogram per day. I know that's kind of a technical toxicology term, but it's a software that allows modeling of the dose response curve to a certain percent change or standard deviation change. And this was based on the finalized US EPA health advisory for PFBS. So this is very similar to what we had done with the Michigan MCL for PFBS. However, the EPA document was finalized, I believe, in 2021. And so we were able to utilize the final version of that EPA PFBS document to help guide the development of the PFBS water quality value. But again, it's very equivalent to our Michigan MCL value. We were able to use the similar toxicokinetic parameters, again, looking at the human equivalent dose adjustment based on the serum half-life in mice compared to humans. As you can see, PFBS still stays in the human blood much, much longer than it stays in the mouse blood. We're seeing a half-life in mice of only 4.5 hours compared to humans at 1,050 hours. This is a challenge with all PFAS compounds. Uncertainty factors were 300x, based again on the interspecies and intraspecies of 3x and 10x respectively, and the 10x per database was utilized, resulting in an ADE of 0.0003 milligrams per kilogram per day. As we were not finding PFBS to really accumulate at all in fish compared to the surface level in the environment, a BAF value was set at 1 for both the trophic 3 and trophic 4 fish species. So next slide. So just real quick, again, to summarize, the revised PFOA value was updated to incorporate more recent toxicity, pharmacokinetic, and environmental fate data. The key study and critical effect mirror those utilized in the development of the Michigan drinking water MCL for PFOA. We had revised the BF values, which were developed based on our fish collection monitoring program, our fish contaminant monitoring program, excuse me, collected in multiple species of our fish within the state of Michigan. And the aquatic toxicity values did not change from the 2011 assessment. In the new PFBS values, they were based again on the same key study and critical effect in as the Michigan drinking water MCL value for PFBS. We had a slight update to the point of departure, which was reflective of the finalized US EPA human health toxicity values published in 2021. And we did develop those tier 2 aquatic toxicity values. I know I didn't spend a lot of time on those because really the human health values are really what drive our assessments for these compounds. but we had limited available data to develop those aquatic toxicity values. So next slide, please. And just to reiterate, the values are again here posted. These are the new values, as well as adding in PFAS as a comparison here. So we have our non-drinking water values on top here, 170 ppt for PFOA, 12 ppt for PFAS, and 670,000 ppt for PFBS. And then for the drinking water values, it's again 66 parts per trillion for PFOA, 11 parts per trillion for PFAS, 8,300 parts per trillion for PFBS. And next slide, please. And I think at that point I'm done. So any questions that we can answer about this during the Q&A portion, that'll be great. Thank you so much for your time.
All right. Is there one more slide there?
Yeah, I think it was just a bio slide. I don't know if we need to have that one. So, but it can be included. So if people want to know about me, it's there.
Let's just say Kevin is not only our newest hire to EGLE, but he also did participate in the Science Advisory Board or with two other esteemed members to create and give us the basis for development of our current MCLs for drinking water. And so Kevin comes to us with a pretty good background. And so we're happy to have him on staff here at EGLE now. So, all right. Thank you, Kevin, for that.
Thank you, Abby.
And I think the next slide takes us to, and questions and answers, right?
Yep, I think so. So I just want to remind folks, so I know we've got a couple questions in the Q&A box already. Please also feel free to raise your hand, and I see we got a couple already. So I appreciate that. If you are on the phone, I think we've got one on the phone. Please hit the hash or pound sign and then the number 2. So I got a couple questions in the Q&A box, and then we're going to get to these hand raises in just a second. So the first question I think was around slide 44 when Kevin, you were talking about the math and the relationship between the new EPA numbers. So I'm going to read this, and Abby, I'm going to hopefully have you direct traffic here. So all this math seems to be blown away by the recent EPA numbers that put the lifetime values in the parts per quadrillion levels. So what set of numbers are folks really supposed to kind of believe in at that point?
Kevin, do you want to put some relationship on the parts per?
Yeah, I can speak briefly to that. So yeah, so the EPA
surface water.
Sorry, what was that, Abby?
I'm just thinking drinking water versus surface water.
Well, obviously we have factors into account for a drinking water consumption, but obviously these are still surface water values for those Great Lakes connecting channels or within 3,000 feet of any drinking water intake. But in terms of the new EPA numbers, obviously the state of Michigan is looking at, but at this time we're still following our current rules with our MCLs, as well as the water quality values that we're promulgating here. But certainly state of Michigan is looking at the EPA and what they're doing, but we can't provide any timelines on any response on that at this time.
Thanks, Kevin.
Great. So it looks, this other question that we had in here, and I think I'm going to start calling on a couple hand raised. And Kevin, you may have answered this kind of as they went in. This was submitted around slide 38 when we were talking about the target levels was for the aquatic life and the toxicity to them. So the question is, what are the target levels for consumption of fish from, for example, the Oscoda River, right? The target values on that slide 38 were for aquatic life. Target levels mentioned for aquatic life in the toxicity to them, not necessarily for fish consumption. So I hope I didn't stumble through that too bad.
No, that's right. Those are separate calculations, right? So what we're concerned about for the aquatic life values, those are ones that we're trying to be protective of toxicity to the fish directly, right? So that's not the calculations of consumption advisories is a separate calculation where we're looking at the concentration in the fish that could lead to potentially adversity within humans based on how much PFAS accumulates in the fish. And really for the PFAS category, PFAS is really the driver for all of the fish consumption advisories, because it's the bioaccumulation factor for PFAS compared to PFOA or PFBS. I mean, PFAS has a bioaccumulation factor of over 5,000 compared to the 84 or even the 1 factor that we had utilized for PFOA and PFBS respectively. So it is a tricky question. I mean, in the sense that, again, those aquatic toxicity values are really there to be protective of the aquatic life. It's not where we're deriving do not eat, or that's goes to DHHS on that. So we're really trying to protect both human health as well as wildlife and the aquatic life based on how we derive these Rule 57 values.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to, it looks like, let's see if Robert Delaney, are you able to unmute yourself? I see your hands raised. You feel free to try and unmute yourself. There you go.
Yep, got it.
Thanks.
So I have a couple of questions, but I won't do them all right away. First for Beth Place. Beth, it looks like you really didn't give any presentation on any of the RI data that the Air Force is collecting. Has there been any kind of resolution with the EGLE being able to get the data from the Air Force and review it? Because obviously the RI is an iterative process. And are you able to look at the data and map it?
Yeah, so we have data from last field season, so not the field season during 2022. That was shared with us previously. We don't have the data from this field season, but Air Force and EGLE are kind of working on a system for that. So Air Force will be able to potentially share the data with us, but it probably will not be something that we would be able to keep or anything of that nature. And that's so we can comply with the federal regulations within the MDHHS. So I guess it's in process.
Hey, Beth, can I jump in there real quick? So RI stands for Remedial Investigation, correct?
Yeah, sorry about
Awesome.
that.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. So so essentially they're still saying because of the Defense Authorization Act that they can't give the data to the public and are only allowing you to look at it temporarily. You won't be able to even maintain the data. I mean, it's hard to understand how you're going to negotiate with them or if you actually know what they're doing.
Sure. And so we're still kind of working through it. Our attorneys are working through it, but yes, it looks like that it's not something that we'll have in-house until the reports are finalized later on in the process. But my understanding is that we will be meeting with Air Force in potentially in December or early winter to discuss the data that's been collected so far and next steps. So as an agency, my understanding is that we will be brought into the process.
Okay. It's not a very satisfying answer, but that's the answer I expected.
Yep.
Okay. I don't know if you want to ask other people, have other people ask questions. I've got a couple more, but I can wait.
Okay. Yeah, I think we've got, that would be great. We'll come back to you.
Right.
And okay, thank you. So how about we've got one more hand raised, and we had a couple more submitted into the Q&A. So Scott Flynn, if you're able to unmute yourself, you can go ahead and ask your question. Awesome.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
My question or questions revolve around what is considered exposure. And I'm not referring to drinking water exposure. Within that, there's probably 6 questions I wanted to ask, such as like, there's several sites. You have in Oscoda, like Whirlpool Angular Access Point. You have Van Etten Ratliff Park. Is just walking down to the river to fish considered exposure? And is that, at a dangerous level where you can get exposure just by walking on the ground by the water? That would be one.
So that's one. Let's start there. Puneet, do you want to take that one? Or do you want, or I can take it?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, I wanted to, referring to exposure. Everybody, says you can get, exposed. And I'm not talking about drinking water or eating fish. I'm just talking about walking on the ground. If you went down to the park at Ratliff Park on Van Etten Lake and just walked down and went on the swing, or if you walk down to the river at Whirlpool Angler Access Point to fish, is that a dangerous exposure?
Okay, that's a broad question. Abby, do you want to take this first, and then I can add?
Yeah, I'll start. What we would consider exposure when we're thinking about it from environmental terms are, are you ingesting it? So are you eating it or drinking it? Are you getting in actual contact with it? Is it getting on your skin to an extent that you're going to have dermal contact exposure? Are you breathing it in? And so if you're in the case of a fisherman, you're going down to the beach. If you were to say walk down there barefoot, you may have some contact with the soils. The levels for direct contact we know are pretty, you'd have to have major exposure in that particular route. Dermal contact with your skin is not the biggest concern for us. So we're not really terribly concerned about barefoot going down to the thing. You'd have to be drinking the water, and we're looking at those kinds of exposures where you're going to have something coming into. So the largest exposure route we have for PFAS in general is going to be drinking water and ingestion into your body through large amounts of consumption of fish, and or, I suppose if you were eating the foam or something, but those are going to be the major routes. So in general, going down to the beach and fishing is not going to be a concern for immediate exposure.
Okay, then it leads me to two more. Swimming at the Oscoda Public Beach. Is a high level of exposure at the public beach in Lake Huron. And then the next one goes to the school up here. I'm aware that perhaps at least what I've heard, the school has wells on site, and they will utilize that water to water like the football field. Are kids exposed to PFAS playing on the football field?
So again, none of that is going to be an exposure of sufficient duration or intensity to give you the kind of exposure that you would need to have in order to have really long-term effects. What they are looking at when they look at PFAS exposure, it's usually over, depending on how we model it, 35 to 70 years, and they're talking about 4 liters a day. So when we come up with these drinking water concentrations, we're talking about drinking that amount of water for your lifetime at 4 liters a day. So if you were to be walking, on a football field that's irrigated with PFAS water, it's not going to be a direct exposure for children. Again, with the beach, same thing. Are they drinking Lake Huron water? Hopefully not. As Kevin said, we don't want you drinking surface water. There's a lot of other things in surface water that will make you sick before the PFAS makes you sick. So the exposure won't be just through, it's not going to be readily absorbed through your skin. And we know that Lake Huron's been tested. Beth can probably tell me where I'm at, but I'm remembering 2 parts per trillion for Lake Huron monitoring that we did. So pretty low levels in our Great Lakes water bodies. So again, that won't be a sufficient exposure to actually cause any kind of detrimental effects.
I appreciate it. I don't mean to hog the whole line, but I just have 2 more if you don't mind.
Those are good questions. Sure, go for it.
the signs that are posted on the Oscoda River, such as at the Whirlpool Angler Access Site, there's a big sign that says swim, fish, enjoy the river, canoe. And then it gives you the warning about eating the fish.
Mhm.
Are all those signs out there current signs as far as any warning goes? They're not old signs that are referring to levels from 5 years ago, are they?
Yeah, I think the levels are going to be pretty stable. So Beth and Amanda can correct me, but I believe those signs would still be current for what we know about the conditions today, correct?
Abby, this is Bill Farrell.
Bill.
I think the sign only refers to, there's fish consumption advisory. So I think they need, the fish consumption advisors are updated every year. So that's where you have your current information. So the sign is just to make you aware that there are fish advisories. So you just need to go to the MDHHS, the website, fish consumption advisories, and they have specific advisories for specific water bodies. And if there is not an advisory for that particular water body, then you would follow the statewide guidelines.
Okay.
Mhm.
And
There are fish consumption advisories for a number of different water bodies in the state. So it is good to check the Eat Safe Fish guidelines if you're going out to do fishing.
correct. And if I could get away with one more.
Okay, go for it.
The base closed in '93, and I think that's pretty much when the firefighting foam was stopped being used, I'm assuming. Over the years, you have your snowpack, your melt, your spring rains, and all this PFAS and PFAS, whatever you want to call it, is going down in the ground into the well water.
Mhm.
So after this, they stopped using it in '93, and you have all these seasons of precipitation that pushes that PFAS down into the ground. What are the levels, the concerns about the very top inch or two of soil, those levels?
Go ahead, Beth.
Yeah, so during the remedial investigation, there is soil sampling that's being conducted. And so the surface of the soil as well as soil at depth will be sampled in areas that are perceived to be source areas. So that we'll have those results when we have the results of the remedial investigation. And some of the soil results are already in, but and I believe there is a memo on the Air Force administrative record that does have some of those soil results in it that have been collected so far.
Is the very top inch of soil a major contributor? So compared to what it is, down 15, 20 feet?
I mean, I think that's more of a site-specific answer, and the mechanism that essentially that was where that was placed in the ground. Generally, in some of the areas I'm thinking of, I would say no. But then again, I do want to kind of add that asterisk that it's sort of a site-specific answer for different areas on the base.
And will this presentation have all these questions listed on it when you make it available?
So the webinar is being recorded, so this Q&A will be available kind of on the back end of the recording. So you can always go and look at the recording and then listen to this portion again, and it will be closed captioned. So that'll be available too to kind of read through that.
Approximately when will that be available?
Usually takes a few days. So I would say end of this week or early next.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you. So we do have a couple more in the Q&A here. So can we get an update on what the Oscoda Area Exposure Assessment Community Advisory Team has been working on?
Okay, I will take that question. So as of now, we plan on start recruiting activities this month. And the investigation team, they have been talking to CAT members, which is Community Advisory Team, regarding the eligibility of the project. Like who is eligible for this study and who's not. So they have been working on that and communicating that information to CAT members.
Great, thank you. There's a note here. It didn't have a question to it, but if anyone has anything to add to it after I'm done reading it, feel free. Otherwise, maybe just a thought for folks moving forward. The note was on to look up 374 water. Sounds like it's an emerging technology that destroys PFOS and PFAS using supercritical water oxidation, breaking chemical bonds to recover the elements. So I don't know if there's any comments on that from the team. Abby shaking her head, yes.
Yeah. There's a couple of different vendors that have supercritical water oxidation technology that they're working on. So it is something we're watching and going to be evaluating those results to see how well it performs. It looks promising, but we want to see it actually in action.
Great.
Hi, Abby, this is Mike. I did talk to that vendor. So I've had discussions with that vendor and I had talks with them about their technology.
Perfect.
Mike, I forgot you were on. I was like, no, I'm Mike. I was confused there for a second, but I'm up to speed. I'm up to speed. So the question here, and I think Brandon, I'm going to throw this one to you. The question is it safe to assume that all fish downstream of the final dam on the Au Sable are unsafe to eat? With bioaccumulation factors so high for humans, it would seem that it is a greater threat than previous chemical contaminants that have already limited fish consumption.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So for those of you who don't know me, I work at MDHHS as a toxicologist, and I am the program manager for our Eat Safe Fish program, which works on our Eat Safe Fish consumption advisories that we put out for water bodies across the state. While there are many species downstream of the foot dam on the Au Sable where we put out advisory for do not eat, they are not all under that same do not eat advisory. I'm going to list them off here. If anyone needs me repeating, feel free, but we have different recommendations for carp, which are limited, and then some migratory species that don't spend their entire lives in the Au Sable, which includes rainbow trout, steelhead, and walleye, which migrate in and out in the river. And those we have a recommendation of 6 per year for those fish. So not all species are completely unsafe to eat, and we would say, never eat them. The way our guidelines work is that, we provide the amount of fish that you can safely eat without an appreciable risk or a significant risk in harmful health effects. So there are some species that we would say, still limit your intake of those fish, but would not say, completely blanket, do not eat.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder, in that chat, everyone, is the link to the Eat Safe Fish website that Brandon was talking about, and you're welcome to go check that out anytime. Can we, I'm getting caught up. That's coming fast and furious now. So I'm going to do one more question, I think, here, and then I did see a couple extra hands pop up as a few of these questions were coming in. So Beth, there's one comment here. Can we get the Department of Defense memo with the soil sampling results on the Wurtsmith site, on the MPART site?
So the decision was made a while ago, and Abby, obviously, you can override this decision, but the decision was made a while ago to not repost the Air Force documents on the MPART website for those that are available on the Air Force administrative record. And so I'm not sure if that's something that we want to continue to do. So I'll leave that up to you. When that memo came out, I did have a blurb. I know sometimes the Wurtsmith sites, needs more updates. But when that memo did come out, that was around July of 2021, and we did have that up there for a while with the Air Force administrative record number. I think right now that's a little more generalized with just a reference to their Air Force Administrative Record website. Abby, how do you want to proceed?
I think at this point, is the document finalized, or is this one the one that we're still waiting for additional data?
No, it's a final memo. It does have some conclusions in there that, EGLE was not asked to comment on the memo. So there's some conclusions on there that maybe we perhaps don't agree with, but it was generated, my understanding, from Air Force to get the data out there.
Okay, I think why don't we reconvene internally, and then we can communicate to this group via email as to what the decision is. I know that we have not generally been putting reports and stuff out on the MPART website, because it's just not always the easiest thing to keep up to date and make it current. So, but Beth, let's talk about the best way to be able to communicate that information to the public so that you guys have it available, and it's and that everybody's got a chance to take a look at it. With that, okay.
Thank you. So like I said, we had some hands up before some of these questions that are in the Q&A popped up. So let me see if I can, Rex Vaughn, if you want to try to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question. There you go.
Good evening. I've got a couple of questions. One of them has to do with a former Air Force installation just north of Harrisville that was the aviation fuel tank farm that supplied the base. And the question was brought up at the RAB meeting, the last RAB meeting, is did the Air Force ever have a AFFF fire suppression system up at that tank farm? And if so, was it ever tested? Did they dump product on the ground? And I wanted to know if the state had any interest in taking a look at that site to find out if we've got another hot spot just north of Harrisville that was created by actions of the Air Force. My second question is back to the math. And the EPA numbers that came out a few weeks ago moved the decimal point over 3 more places, basically. And we've gone from parts per trillion to parts per quadrillion. Not quite sure what the nanogram or the grams per liter numbers turn out to be. Maybe it's pico or whatever. But it seems to throw a huge wrench into all the work that's been previously done, because they've moved the threshold so far down closer to 0 to a point that it's not measurable by any current standards. What plans does the state have to be able to address this quantum leap by our friends in Washington to a point where they're talking about standards that the technology doesn't exist to measure it? And it's about as close to 0 as we can get. But yet I see numbers in the thousands and millions in the presentations earlier today that tells me that all that work is now subject to reevaluation. And where do we go from here with these new numbers from EPA? So, and I got a third question is, has anybody done any work to find out how volatile PFAS is and whether or not it was atomized in the scrubbers that were running for decades at the base when they were cleaning up VOCs, and all that water which had PFAS in it was going through those air scrubbers, and that water vapor was cast out into the community and could have drifted anywhere based upon the prevailing winds. What's going on with that potential source? And with that, I'll sit back and see if folks can sort through my 3 questions.
I'll start with the middle one, Rex. How about that? Let's talk about EPA for a minute. So the interim lifetime health advisories are based on the information that EPA took from their science advisory board, looking at reinterpreting the data and information they had from the best toxicological research and epidemiology studies. What will happen next is EPA will take the information they got from their science advisory board and then relook at it and establish some maximum contaminant level guidelines. they establish these numbers below a detection limit. So as you said, they're pretty darn low. The detection limit, the actual reliable detection limit for drinking water methods right now is about 2 parts per trillion. They set the PFOA level at 4 parts per quadrillion, which we can't detect. So they won't set a maximum contaminant level below a detectable level. That's not going to happen because they have to be able to, the water plants who provide municipal water, who would actually be implementing these drinking water values, would need to be able to detect it. We need to be able to know that it's there and not set the level at 0. So it is an issue. What we will be doing in the state of Michigan is continuing to use our maximum contaminant levels, our drinking water guidance values, so that we can continue to work on addressing those systems that are below drinking water standard maximum contaminant levels, the MCLs, but above detectable limits. And we know we do have about 150 systems, and those can be anything from little mobile home parks to schools to little municipal systems, community systems that have detections. And so we're going to continue to work with those systems to try to continue to bring down those concentrations. And then we will continue to watch and evaluate what EPA has for information, additional information and science regarding their recommended interim action levels. Once it goes through and this is going to take probably another year. This is going to go on all through 2023. We don't expect final maximum contaminant levels from EPA until the end of 2023. So we will have time to evaluate, okay, what are they proposing? What does that mean for Michigan? How much would we have to adjust? Or it is possible that they propose a number that's higher than what we have. Not likely, but it is possible. At which point we would have a decision to keep our own numbers or to go with their numbers. And so I think Michigan's going to continue to weigh our options and look at the science that they're using to develop these numbers. In all cases, Michigan's going to continue to put public health first. We're going to continue to use the science and the toxicology that we have to make those decisions to protect public health. And so even in the case where we have from residential drinking water wells, if we've got a detection, even though it's below a drinking water criteria, we're still offering filters in a lot of cases. And so it is our intentions to continue to be protective and make sure everybody's taken care of while these things are kind of in flux. I think, one of the things that we know from PFAS is the research is going on fast and furious, as is the treatment technologies. And so there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and we want to position ourselves as a state, make sure we're ready to take advantage of both the new science that comes out as well as any new treatment technology that might help us out along the way. So hopefully that answers your question. The second question on the volatileness of PFAS, there are several actually, you know what? I'm going to phone a friend. Mike Jury, get on here. And it's the FTOHs that are most volatile, correct, Mike? That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. So how about I'll answer Rex's first question first, which is he asked about the facility in Alcona County. And Alcona County is part of the Gaylord District. Back quite a while ago, Randy Roth, the district supervisor for RRD, and I talked about that site. There's no known release of AFFF at the site, Rex. There doesn't appear to have been a fire department. There was a small building that was a pump building. That doesn't mean that there couldn't have been, but after talking to the health department, the fire department, and obviously I didn't talk to somebody that was in the fire department way back in the day, our best answer is we're not aware of it. If you or anyone listening to this broadcast that we have information that could help us, we certainly would be more than willing relook at it. But currently, from the people we talked to, we're not aware of it. As I said, doesn't mean it wasn't, but if we get more information, then we would certainly want to look into it.
Okay,
So
Mike-
that's the answer to that one.
Okay, Mike, let me just interrupt here quickly. Remember
Sure.
that site brought in jet fuel by a sea tanker, pumped it ashore to those tank farms, and then it was pumped to the base in an underground pipeline all the way down from north of Harrisville to the base.
Correct.
So millions and millions of gallons of Jet A were transported, and the risk of fire would, of course, have been, if you look at the risk analysis, would have been one of the number one issues that they would have. So it seems probable that they would have some ability to fight a fire if it broke out. And knowing the Air Force, they always like to test those things and train people on those types of fires. So the question is, did that site ever get any type of training or PFAS or AFFF discharges for the training purposes? Because if a fire had taken place up there, it would have lit the sky up for miles around and everybody would have known about it. But maybe not.
Right. Well, I absolutely agree with you that it's plausible that it happened and that there may have been a training or a testing or a spill there. So that's something we're going to have to discuss internally and look at it again. It would be, as I said, coming out of the Gaylord district office, unless there's an agreement between the Bay City office and Gaylord office for Bay City to handle it. But
Mike, you're so good. You cross over boundaries with
I do. Thank you.
great
And that's why Randy and I discussed it. And we didn't have any reason to believe, as I said, after talking to some folks that had some history with it. But we'll relook into it, Rex. I think it's appropriate to relook into it and talk about it, because what you said is true. You have millions of gallons of fuel, and it certainly makes sense to me that they could have. I just don't doubt that they could have. So we'll have to discuss it, and we'll have to get back to you on that. I know there was a cleanup done there for VOCs at that site and was done. We did look at old aerial photos too, Rex, going back and seeing if we could see any kind of fire apparatus that was there, and we never saw anything in the photos that we looked at. But thank you for bringing that back up again. Now, going to your question about volatile, PFAS is volatiles. And the answer is yes, certain types of PFAS can be volatile. Certainly there are PFAS that are alcohols that can be volatile, but how volatile, are they as volatile as gasoline? No, but they still are somewhat volatile. And I don't know if, I heard Bill Farrell. I don't know, Bill, have you guys looked at any of those? I think the Human Health Work Group had looked at some compounds looking at the volatility of PFAS.
Mike, I'm not aware at this point, no. I don't think anybody has looked at it closely, other than I think that one paper that was written about. But other than that, no.
We know EPA is Office of Research and Development is working on some stuff regarding this, but they're still working on the basics of how do you sample it? What does it mean? There's been a few papers written about it, about the potential for pure AFFF that has been spilled to potentially be an issue. I haven't seen anything written on if it's AFFF that's, not the concentrate, but the actual, 3% solution in water all mixed up, if that really represents a true volatilization. But to your question, Rex, about the air stripper and whether or not that could be a potential, that's something we've talked about. And so far, I don't think we have enough information to really make that kind of determination. We've kind of gotten a variety of different answers when we've asked about it. Mike, did you want to comment any more on that?
Actually, Beth had the best answer of all really related to that. And Beth, if you'll give them the answer you gave me when I asked that question.
You're putting
Is
her on
Beth
the
still
spot,
there?
though.
Well, the answer was that it's part of the RI that the Air Force will have to do. There's Beth.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, Mike. You don't often give me that compliment, so.
Oh, no.
But yeah, go ahead. I believe it'll be part of the RI that we recommend.
Yeah.
Okay, one comment I would like to make, and this is based on 43 years of working with spray water systems and evaporative cooling equipment and heat transfer and everything else, is that in an air stripper, just like in an evaporative cooling tower, not everything leaves as a vapor. There's an awful lot of particulate or droplets of water at the microscopic level that leave those devices and are carried downwind by prevailing winds. So it doesn't have to be completely an aerosol. It is actual physical liquid that can be containing PFAS because it came out of the ground before all those carbon tanks got put in. And it's been blown around the community for decades. And somehow or another, either the state or the Air Force has got to start finding out if that's a source, some of the widespread contamination and some of those unknown source PFAS sites that have been located around up towards Cedar Lake or the east side of Van Etten Lake. So I hope it definitely gets more attention in the RI than I've gotten the feeling that the Air Force is going to put to it so far.
So a little more detail on that. We that's one of those items that are listed under the unresolved remedial investigation comments. And so we did not reach an agreement on that one. Air Force is sampling surface soils to investigate that issue. EGLE would have liked to see a more
share the data with you.
EGLE would have liked to have seen a more robust evaluation of that, but so that's kind of still in flux and correspondence. It's one of the items that are still on our radar.
Stand your ground, Beth. Be tough with it.
All right, thank you.
Great, thanks, Rex. So I think we'll jump to, we've got another hand up. So Robert, if you want to try and unmute yourself there, and then we'll jump back into the Q&A.
Okay, my questions had time to multiply while sitting here. One of the things on the soil sampling, and it begs another question about this data that Air Force isn't necessarily easily providing. Historically, I've always found with the Air Force, and I worked with these guys for 20 some years, is they never came forward and said, oh, we polluted something and somebody might be being exposed. It was always EGLE, DEQ at the time, that came up and said, look, people are getting exposed to this stuff. Now, I cannot think of one time in my career at Wurtsmith that they ever came forward and said, hey, there's a problem here and somebody's going to get exposed. That said, that's why I'm super concerned about them not providing the data so that people can make their independent decisions on who's exposed and what are the transport routes. So that's a question, I guess, to you, Beth, is say, for instance, we find that the soil, well, I don't know if they're really sampling well, but this issue about the strippers has been around for quite a number of years, where we've wanted somebody to sample the soils and hasn't been done. But how are you going to know if people are being exposed by some pathway that hasn't been discovered in the past? That's the thing I feel is EGLE's job, is to make sure that people aren't getting exposed to something. And I see this new hold up on data and being able to share data as another method to keep people from making appropriate decisions on the human health issue. I guess that's all just a comment, because there's not much you can say to that.
Well, just as, Bob, if you don't mind, I can say just a
No, go
little to
ahead.
that one. So the soil data is not really an issue. It's more when we are looking at the water data, but and sharing
Sure.
of that becomes an issue. So, well, more of an issue. So my understanding is that the majority of soil data collected in the remedial investigation is, a lot of it is in that memo. I really have to look back to see when it was dated to see if it's all the data for the soil or not.
But they were, oh, sorry.
No, oh, okay. But
Yeah, but they were looking specific. Oh, okay. Go ahead.
there must be a delay. So sorry. So yeah, and we can, you know, definitely at least let you guys know what AR number that is. I don't have it at my fingertips right now. So you have that, and I'll look back at it to see if everything's in there or not. But I know that EGLE does have all the soil data that was collected in that first remedial investigation field season. So that's something that we have. I don't believe it's something that we can, you know, not in a, we have access to it, I would say. But, you know, not necessarily in a downloadable format. I'd have to look back at the files to see that.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, I looked at the, I know they've had one soil report out, and I've looked at that, at the data from it. But they were focused in on the sludge from the wastewater treatment plant being placed on the surface as fertilizer, I guess, for the grass. And that's what their sampling seemed to be focused in on. And then in the FTO2 area, it was because of the known spills. I think they might have had the same thing over at the lagoon that they dug up. But in the case of the strippers, had they sampled it all around those air strippers to see if indeed PFAS was or was not being dispersed into the soils around there. And then, okay. And then if the contamination's offsite, I'm sure they won't be showing the data because of the NDAA or NDA, whatever it is. So then again, if they won't report that data, again, people that are off the site, like homeowners and stuff like that, people won't know what's going on. So you should identify that to them, that if they've got data that indicates anybody might be getting exposed, they need to report that to the agencies. I think that's a due care responsibility. Sorry, go ahead.
I think that's, you know, that's a good point to keep in mind, and you know, that is in our minds if people are being exposed and in what potential routes and things of that nature. So
Okay.
the way we left the work plan was that Air Force was going to sample surface soils from the air strippers. And again, EGLE did not agree that it was maybe a robust enough plan is the way to mention that. So that's still under discussion and correspondence.
Right. And that's why they don't want us to know what's going on. So anyway, sorry, I will get off the editorial stuff.
Yeah.
I wanted my next
just
one
real
is,
quick for clarification, I just want folks to know that really that NDAA, I mean, we can check in with the legal teams from Air Force and Department of Attorney General. Again, we get more into that, but right now, really, that issue really is being discussed on PFAS and water, just so folks are aware.
sure.
Thank you.
What I wanted to talk to was with Kevin about the health, the numbers that have come, that they recently surface water numbers. And one question I had is that at this particular site, the chemicals PFHXS and PFNA are more likely to be problems than PFBS. That PFBS didn't show up that much, I don't think. And on top of that, it's not bioaccumulative, and I don't think its toxic effects are thought to be or shown to be as high as the perfluorohexane sulfonate and the PFNA. So is there a reason, because I thought that EPA had come up with health advisory numbers for those two chemicals. So is there a reason why surface water hasn't looked at those yet, or is that part of the plan to look
We
at those
are.
now?
Yep. No, that's a great question. We are looking at those. So when we are generating our water quality values, though, and this goes back to the equations that were shared on during the presentation, where we do look at all those, human health endpoints, whether it's animal studies or epidemiology studies. However, when we're looking at having to generate those values, we still need the BAF values, right? We need those bioaccumulation factors to address the fish consumption, the trophic 3 fish consumption and the trophic 4 fish consumption. And so where we're kind of working on those PFNA and PFHXS numbers is where we're really trying to solidify and generate those BAF values, trying to utilize our data from the Michigan Fish Contaminant Monitoring Program, but it's we're not there yet. So we're still working on that, and hopefully we can get some numbers out there in the not too distant future, but I can't provide a timeline at this point.
Sure. Well, the Clark's Marsh, we did find the fluorohexane sulfonate in the water and in the water and in the fish. I don't know if you got enough data to get your BAF, but anyway, there is data there.
Yeah, no, we're definitely looking at that, and like I said, we're still gathering some data. We're waiting for some additional test results to come back in yet, but no, we're certainly looking at hopefully to generate some BAF values that we can feel confident about, and then once we get those, we can move forward with generating some health effects numbers.
Okay. I just also wanted to say ditto on Rex Vaughn's comments about the health advisory that EPA, the provisional health advisory they've come up with, that the natural outcome of if those numbers stand up, then it's going to drive a lot of debate about what the criteria should be, and conceivably driving stuff down to the detection limit. So anyway, I guess that's all I had for the moment.
Okay, well, no, that's a very good question. And like I said, we are still looking into that, and hopefully we can, continue to look at that data that we're gathering and make some progress and generate some of those BF values that we can feel confident with.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Awesome, thank you. I know we have a question in the chat about fish advisory. So I know I put Brandon on the case, so he's gonna send something in the chat so that everyone can see it. So I know that's sitting out there. We're working on it for you. So that's coming in the chat here in just a second. So there is a question here. Is there any proven credibility to the water vaporization theory of PFAS?
And I think we're talking about volatilization and like Rex was talking about that vaporization if you're going through some sort of a air stripper process. I think that's what the question is talking about, because there's two routes. One would be like an aerosol type of thing where it's a mist coming out of a sprinkler head or air stripper or something like that. And then there's the volatilization, which would be just those the PFAS, the parts of the PFAS family, the FTOHs that have the ability to volatilize, to actually evaporate into the air. Those are PFOS and PFOA don't do that, and we don't have a ton of information on those. And I can't speak to whether or not we've got information or how much of this particular plume. Beth could probably talk more about that. But yeah, there's a lot of research going into that portion of volatilization of PFAS, but the science is still really in the beginning stages. And so we're really still trying to grapple with how do you sample it? What do you sample? What does it mean? And then how do you evaluate the risks surrounding it? But I think it's going to be a bigger risk if you have a fresh release with say you spilled a 5-gallon bucket of AFFF concentrate, then you're more likely to have an actual risk for volatilization and potentially indoor air concerns. I think with what we've got now, you don't have houses necessarily over high concentrations of groundwater plumes in this area, you're talking about, I think the water vaporization, if I'm understanding the question correctly, is more talking about volatilization. So hopefully that answered your question, Scott.
Oh, there was a little follow-up. I don't know if you see that there. So with general surface water evaporization.
Yeah, surface water is so if we're talking about like Lake Huron, where concentrations are down at 2 to 4 parts per trillion, evaporation is not going to be an issue. PFOS generally is not going to evaporate because it doesn't have that the Henry Law's constants isn't what you need to be able to do that. So again, it would have to be pretty high concentrations in a surface water body to have to worry about evaporation or volatilization of PFOS, or not PFOS, but PFAS, the family of PFAS becoming off of surface water. So it's not something we would expect, and it would not be, and if I can take Beth's answer, it would be something if when they look at all the routes of exposure in the RI, in that the Air Force is going to have to look at, they will have to look at all the routes of exposure, including any of those types of potential what if scenarios that happen with, people coming into contact with groundwater or surface water or swimming in the beaches or sitting in the sand. All of those routes of exposure would have to be considered when they're doing the evaluation investigation of exposures for cleanup at the Air Force Base.
Great, thank you, Abby. Bob, is your hand still up, or is it up again? Fire away.
Yeah, it's up again. Sorry. Like I said, these questions just kept multiplying. So just a couple things I wanted to say on the question about the fuel storage area or fuel supply point up in Alcona County that you guys are probably familiar with, DFSP, Escanaba, same exact thing for KI Sawyer Air Force Base, that they had their fuel tanks up there and offloaded from ships. And they had a fire suppression system with AFFF, which created huge problems. So I don't know what the situation was down in Oscoda normally, if it was DOD that handled the actual pole yard or whatever, the fuel supply point. If they were the ones that were operating it normally, they would have had a fuel or fire suppression system on that. So I would just to encourage you to actually check to see if there is a problem, PFAS problem at that place. And the other thing that it brought to mind was the petroleum, oil, and lubricant yard on the actual base. And I don't know, I hadn't thought to really look to see what kind of sampling had been done around that pole yard, but that would also likely have a fire suppression system there as well. So that might be another place that you should think about as a potential source area. So those are just FYIs. The other last thing I wanted to say was that the EGLE website is much easier to navigate, to find documents and use them, or at least the last time I used it, was much easier than the Air Force's site. The Air Force's site wasn't exactly intuitive. And so I'd encourage you to keep up the documents on the EGLE site. And I think that's about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Awesome, thanks. Looks like we've got another hand raised. Mark Henry, if you want to try and unmute yourself and you can ask your question.
Two things related to Bob's discussion just a minute ago. First of all, as the co-chair of the RAB, I had an opportunity to meet with the other co-chair from the Air Force, and I asked about the tank farm up in Alcona, and he provided an answer. He told me that that was a privately owned piece of property that would store fuel, I guess, for the Air Force and sell it, or made arrangements to get it to the Air Force, but it was never an Air Force facility, and that this was looked at under the FUDS program, which is formerly used defense sites. And so he said that the Air Force never had any part in the actual operation of that. But based on knowledge that I have learned from other sources, if you have a tank farm, it's my understanding that back in the day, that there is a requirement for an AFFF system to be installed in tank farms. And related to the POL yard on the base itself, I have raised that question a couple of times with the Air Force, and the Air Force said that they would look into it. And it's very possible that there was a system there as well, but it is being looked at by the Air Force right now as an issue or a potential issue. So that's it.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that, yeah, Mark, you're correct on the information that EGLE has in our files is that the Harrisville property was not owned or operated by DOD. So, you know, whether or not that means anything as to whether AFFF was there or not, but that is the information that we had in our historic file.
Great, thank you. Let's see here, Rex Vaughn, if you want to try and unmute yourself and fire away.
Yeah, I wanted to add one thing. The mode of transport from that tank farm to the base was pipeline. I know people that actually were involved in the removal of that line. So it was a very close relationship between that fuel contractor and the Air Force for delivery of Jet A to the base. You know, their only customer was the Air Force. They weren't selling Jet A to anybody else in Wurtsmith because that was the only people consuming it. So the link is definitely there. If it's separated by contractual arrangements, to me doesn't mean a whole lot. It means that there's a potential or a plausible potential up there for contamination that's never been documented. Thank you.
Thank you, Rex.
Great, thanks.
We down to the last ones here, Mike?
Yep. So I think, Bob, I saw your hand jump up right there, and I know we're slowing down on the Q&A box. So I think if you want to throw your last comments in, and then we can move on.
Sure. I just, this has to do with the offsite sites and the residential well sampling. And if I understood the slide correctly, there was like 200 residential wells that were sampled at one point, and now there's something like 70. Is that my understanding correct of that? Was there only?
I can take this. So there are 225 wells that were sampled in round 3, but we received results from 70 of them for now. But we are going to receive more. Yeah, for now.
Oh, okay. And I know there's a whole lot of sensitivity about that data and property rights and whatnot and disclosure. But is anybody looking at that with regard to how it compares with the plumes that the EGLE installed wells are showing? Because in the day when we first started doing the residential well stuff, we didn't have any problem of using that data in mapping. But now I believe you're maybe not using it in mapping. So, but has anybody taken a gander at it to see what it's showing? Because there was really no context for any of the data that you're taking data right now, but for we in the public, there was really no, what's the context of this? What does this data mean? It just is data points. Is the plume getting worse? Is it getting better? Those kinds of things.
So we shared our first 2 rounds of results with EGLE so that, you know, EGLE and MDHHS can look into that, how plume is behaving, where are the hits in terms of drinking water numbers. So even after this round, we'll be sharing the data with EGLE as well. And we are going to, you know, keep looking at that angle as well. And we'll make our final public health determination because this is our round 3. And so yes, we have been sharing data with EGLE.
Okay, and then I guess I'm sorry, go ahead, Abby.
I was just going to say, Bob, I think that Amanda and Lynn have been looking at the data too. And in the conversations that I've been having with them, that there have not been major changes in concentrations throughout the plume. And they can certainly correct me if that's not correct, but I don't think, and that goes across the state. We are not seeing dramatic changes in concentrations in residential drinking water wells. They might bounce around, from 5 to 6 or 7, but there's just not huge variations, and it doesn't seem to be getting better or getting worse. It just seems to be staying fairly stable.
Okay, is right now we were trying to get the Air Force to look at the east side of Van Etten Lake, and I think there's been some movement on that. But up to this point, there's not been an effort to look for another source, as from what I understand. I guess we're going to keep asking for somebody to find out what the source of that stuff is if it's not the Air Force.
Well, and I think that, will tie in very interestingly with how drinking water levels tie in with EPA when they get done with establishing their MCLs at the end of next year. So, there might be a nexus there that might be convenient and applicable to this site.
Yep. Okay, thanks. That's it.
Okay. And I think are we going to call John the last hand of the night?
The last hand of the night. Yes. So John, if you want to try and unmute yourself, and you can ask your question. Hey, John O, if you're there. All right. Well,
maybe he doesn't know he's got his hand up. He doesn't need to push #2 to unmute, does he?
I don't think so. I will. I clicked ask to unmute, so I think that'll throw a little pop-up onto his screen. So we'll give it a second or two. And then I would just, my only recommendation at that point is, John, please feel free to reach out. This echoes for everybody. Just because the meeting is over doesn't mean that the Q&A is over. So please feel free to reach out to any of the folks, any of the panelists that are on the calls here today. We're happy to help answer any of the questions that you do have. So I'm going to say let's move on, if that's all right. And his hand went down. So John, feel free to reach out anytime, and we'll be happy to help. So
so Mike Gurney, this is Mike Jury.
Yep.
Are you able to see whether or not Brandon has typed an answer for Connie's question about fish advisories, and he typed some other information on Eat Safe Fish? And I don't know if people were able to see that or not. Can you know if
it's in the chat?
Yep. Yeah, so I opened up the chat so that the panelists were able to send messages to everyone. So the information that he wanted to communicate, yep, on the fish are all in there. And then as well as I believe Beth sent a link to one of the Air Force documents. So that's all in there. All
right, fantastic. Yeah. Thank you.
And the last question I see here, which maybe Brandon can talk about, is the RAB was told the fish consumption team sampled Atlantic salmon in 2019, but I don't know. Brandon Reed, do you know anything about Atlantic salmon being?
I don't know about that. I know that there was sampling of Atlantic salmon in Lake Huron, and we expect that some of those fish would travel through Lake Huron up to the Au Sable, but our guidelines still recommend to do not eat out of precaution, knowing how much PFAS has been found in some fish there. I would have to check with the Fish Contaminant Monitoring Program lead, Brandon Armstrong, about that. I don't have that information offhand the last time it was sampled, unless someone else on the panel does know.
Okay, let's put a pin in that one, and we can report back at the next meeting. But I think that sounds like a pretty robust conversation for tonight. So what do we call it? Call it a wrap, Mike?
Yep. Yeah, so if you, Shelley, if you want to hit the next slide, I believe, Abby, do you want to run through? I think on the slideshow is the website. Do you want to run through that? Is there anything to do? I don't know.
I don't think there's much to do. I think
Perfect.
everybody here is expert at our PFAS website. I think they already know about the Eat Safe Fish Guide. The only thing I will say is if you're new to our MPART website, go to the MPART website. You can just type MPART into the Google browser. It'll take you right there. But our PFAS geographic information system is very helpful if you want to see a geographic spatial representation of all the MPART sites, our surface water sampling, and see some of the data associated with it is there. It won't have site-specific data, like it won't have all the Wurtsmith sites, but it will have our statewide surface water sampling and drinking water sampling. So that's helpful. But other than that, I would say if you want specific information, reach out to this team, to Beth Place, to Amanda Armbruster, to Lynn Gosson, myself, and we are happy to help out in any way we can. So,
Yep.
But thank you everybody for coming tonight.
Awesome. And I'll say, if you do want site-specific information on that MPART site, is the PFAS sites and area of interest. You can search for Wurtsmith, and that's where we're talking about today on this site in particular. And you can find updates on the Wurtsmith site. So thanks. I'll echo what Abby said. Thanks for joining. Thanks for a great conversation. Really appreciate it. And talk to y'all soon.
Thank you.